welcome everyone, brothers and sisters.
Comrades and friends.
My name is Tandi Farley. I work with the Professional Staff Congress, that's CUNY Staff and Faculty Union. I am also here representing the Professional Staff Union, which is our internal staff union as the Secretary-Treasurer.
And I'm Ben Bath from AFM Local 82, and we want to welcome you to the first public forum hosted by Left Labor Project.
Thank you. So tonight's forum is going to be on the role of the labor movement in defending immigrant rights.
But first we wanted to thank SEIU 1199 for making this space available. It is much appreciated. Tonight's topic is unfortunately extremely timely. We won't develop that thought since that's the role of our speakers and panel discussion. But we'd like to briefly introduce you to who the Left Labor Project is and what we do. The Left Labor Project is made up of union activists and supporters of the labor movement in New York City. We include union officers, staffers, rank and file, active and retired, and the as of yet unorganized, as well as students and young people. We welcome immigrants. No people are illegal. All people are welcome. We believe that the historic labor movement and its allies here and around the world comprise the central force which can win democracy and equality and peace and a better life for working people. We welcome all workers, both members of organizations, independents, and those who simply want to learn more about the centrality of the working class in making social change. We believe that power concedes nothing without a demand, and that the oligarchs and monopoly capitalists won't give an inch unless challenged by a broad and organized working class. We therefore have four unifying principles. One, the Left Labor Project believes in socialism and democracy. Two, we believe that the working class, together with communities of color and all oppressed peoples, is the only coalition with the power to achieve lasting social change. Three, as an organization, we do not interfere in the internal affairs of other organizations with which our individual participants might be members of. And four, most importantly, our meetings are never longer than 2 hours and they end by 8 p.m.
Okay, so before we jump in, I'm going to explain a little bit of the flow of the meeting, and then I'm also going to introduce our keynote speakers and panelists. So we're going to hear opening remarks from Bhairavi Desai. We're going to follow that by Dr. Patricia Marthon, Brandon Mancilla, and Ligia Guallpa. So after we've heard from our panelists, we're going to open the discussion and hopefully have a really robust conversation. We have a couple of questions that we're going to first pitch to the panelists, and then we're going to throw it open to everyone else to kind of come through with their questions. Just to note, we have 2 minutes per speaker, so we're going to try to keep it as equitable and keep the flow moving as much as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to do a brief introduction for the panelists and keynote speakers. So Bhairavi Desai is the executive director of the 28,000 member New York Taxi Workers Alliance. That's a union of yellow cab, Uber, and Lyft drivers. NYTWA's campaigns have won back billions in wage theft recovery and debt forgiveness for drivers who bear all the expenses in the industry and also pay raises. NYTWA is the first organization of independent contractors to hold a charter with the AFL-CIO. Dr. Patricia Marthon is a medical university doctor and an executive vice president with the Healthcare Union 1199, SEIU United Healthcare. She has also worked with community-based organizations in the pharmacy division. So that's SEIU United Healthcare Workers East. Previously, she worked on administrative and management side of medicine, including the director of business development and operations for a series of office-based surgical practices and clinics in New York City. She chaired the DEI committee on the H&H bears and translated for the Haitian refugees in Buffalo, New York, which is really exciting. Okay, we also have Brandon Mancilla, okay. So Brandon Mancilla, he is the director of UAW Region 9A, and he was the first president of UAW Local 5118. Mancilla has also worked for UAW Local 2325. Thank you for being here. And we also have Ligia Guallpa. She is the executive director of the Workers' Justice Project. She played a leading role in building Los Deliveristas Unidas, or Los Deliveristas Unidos, and is spearheading government partnerships to establish public charging stations and rest hubs for near-city delivery workers. And it also says here, we want to congratulate Ligia and the WJP on their most recent victory in winning $16.2 million in stolen wages. And for immigrant workers. So we're really excited to hear from you all.
And we will begin with our keynote speaker, Bhairavi Desai.
Good evening, everybody. It's so good to see you all. This is like, just honest to God, this warms my heart so much to see you all. I mean, I've been thinking about today, and I keep thinking to myself, I don't really know how to walk into this discussion, kind of feeling like on a high or really hopeful and optimistic. Because the reality is we're living in really terrible times. And there is a real serious threat to the working class and to poor people, across this country, and given who this country is, really across the globe. I mean, I think for a lot of us, since October 2023, the world has just felt really dark. It's hard to imagine to keep your eyes wide open when you're living through a genocide, and it's being committed at the hands of your own country, and you feel so powerless as to what you can do about it. And instead of seeing some progress in that, in this situation, instead feels like we're just going so much more backwards. And so I think a lot of us, right, and I think a lot of you are really young, and I think you'll find throughout your life, you're always hearing, particularly from people on the left, there's a real threat, there's a real threat, there's a crisis, there's an urgency. And it's always true, because that's the nature of capitalism. It's chaos and cruelty. So it is always urgent. You do always feel a threat. But I think the political moment that we're in right now, for a lot of us, truly is unprecedented. I mean, every day, you're waking up to news about, from mass firings to, a more right-wing, militaristic, imperialist agenda that gets covered up and, that's being talked about it in a way that we haven't heard the Democrats talk about it. So it's supposed to appeal to us as somehow being more dovish and not hawkish. And yet we know it's still gonna lead to, a lot of militarism and war. And so, for me, I mean, I became a unionist because I think that for me, the most important issues are really poverty and militarism. And I look at issues of racism and sexism and other forms of bias as really just extensions for me of capitalism and in particular imperialism. And we're living in a moment right now where all of that feels incredibly heightened. And at a time when things are so polarized, and it just feels like people are really like being bamboozled, I mean, on one hand, it's like, we're gonna cut down the budget and everyone's gonna get $5,000. And then and then you see in the news that the budget they're talking about cutting, the numbers that they're putting out there are expenses that have already been spent. That's not real money that's actually being cut, right? Or just, in terms of immigration, I think a lot of us, when we think of immigrant rights, it's fundamentally a human rights issue. I also think it's fundamentally an anti-war issue, because if you think about why do people migrate, my parents, I was born in India, my parents came here, we all came here from India. We were not leaving a war zone, but most of the people that I represent in our union, they're coming from countries that have been really destabilized by the militarism of the U.S., whether it's been dropping bombs or just the level of destabilization of different countries with the overwhelming presence of U.S. military bases and military presence. And so there's no doubt, to immigrant rights, to me, it's fundamentally, it is about human rights, and it's about war and peace. But really, at the end of the day, when we think of immigrant rights in our country, immigration is an economic policy. It's the same economic policy, whether they're talking about, restricting the rights of workers to vote for unions, whether they're talking about undoing, minimum wage laws, or allowing for misclassification like we have across the gig economy. These are economic policies. And, from our vantage point in our industry, it's not lost on us that when this administration is talking about mass deportations, they're talking about mostly deportations of immigrant workers that are primarily service workers and low-wage workers. It's displacing workers out of an economy in the same industries where there's a lot of talk about AI, automation, right? I don't think that if the workers in these industries are displaced, I don't think anyone, including the oligarchs, are expecting native-born American workers to take over those jobs. Like, they're not talking about job creation, right? But the people that are promoting, the immigration policies of mass deportation are the same ones that are literally financially invested in AI and automation and in a future of, from our vantage point of driverless cars. And so, we've had to follow Elon Musk very closely for a long time, because while, our members drive Teslas, and while actually the stocks for Tesla have actually been tanking, what particularly even going back to news from last September, October, last fall before the election, there was so much talk about the hopes for Elon Musk really lie in driverless vehicles. The expectation is that he will put together a driverless fleet, similar to Uber or Lyft, right? And the latest news has been, so Uber is really scrambling because Uber is trying to get both Elon Musk as well as Google, their company is called Waymo, to get them to partner with Uber, where they would own the driverless vehicle, but that vehicle would appear on the Uber app. And so, right, Uber's still gonna get, Uber's gonna be the middle entity, so they're still gonna be able to make a profit from that, while human drivers are cut out of that work. Just about 2 days ago, the news had come out where, Uber CEO is talking about how Elon Musk has said that he's not interested in partnering with Uber, and they would really want to go it alone. I mean, it's too early to tell in this exact moment, but we do know that they're expecting in 2 years from now for Uber to have its prototype ready, and we know that like in California and parts of the Southwest, and in a month or two starting in Florida, they're gonna have like Waymo, Google's company's already been testing out the driverless vehicle. Uber's expecting it to prototype to be ready in 2 years from now, 5 years from now to actually be commercially in operation, and in 10 years from now to possibly even be like the dominant mode. And I tell you something, some of you are looking at me probably the way I would have looked at myself a few months ago on this topic. It all sounds so crazy and it sounds so far-fetched, but I think the political tide is so different right now, and it feels like a much, from our vantage point, that a lot of the policies that we're seeing, I mean, look at the priorities, the first week priorities of this administration. It was about AI, and it was about immigration, and really the displacement of workers. And so we're now in a position as a union of needing to take this threat seriously, and really wondering exactly what's gonna, come down the pike for us in the next couple of years. And if this really is part of the plan, then we expect way more deportations, and we expect other kinds of strategies. I don't know how many of you remember, after 9/11, what they did is they called them registrations, where particularly Muslim immigrants, there would be lines of people. They didn't set up the camps because that was the big debate at the time. So instead they had, people line up and do registrations. I remember how many of our own members had left the city at that time. And so whether we're talking about mass deportations, or possibly things like registrations or travel bans, travel bans are not being talked about as publicly right now, but there is so much fear among workers and their family members of traveling back and forth, taking any kind of a risk. So all these different policies, ultimately they're about the containment of workers' mobility as a way to really reshape the workforce and reshape the economy that we're under. And so we as a labor movement have to be on the front lines. There is, the immigrant rights and workers' rights are two sides of the same coin. When we think about the rights of the working class, right, there's always an attempt to divide the working class, whether it's based on, what type of job you do, or the economic, the economics of what you're earning, how you may even be classified as a worker under the law, or, obviously, divisions around race and ethnicity and religion. Immigration is just another way of trying to divide the working class. It's to displace a community of the working class and to do it in a way to break the solidarity that other workers might otherwise have with this workforce. That's really what deportations are about. And we, as the labor movement, we have to help change that narrative for people to understand that immigrant rights are fundamentally workers' rights. If they are going to displace any one group of workers for any reason, there is nothing that stops them from displacing a different group of workers at the next phase of that plan. It's like we think of it that way in our industry when we look at issues of like misclassification, that workers who really are employees because the boss controls every Like, Uber and Lyft, they dispatch the fare, they set the rate of fare, they send you the passenger, they control what we call your economic destiny. They shape your day. And we've had a generation's bargain in our economy that when the boss gets to control everything, you in return have certain basic labor rights, right? To be able to bargain and to have a minimum floor so they cannot sink you further into poverty. Well, we know from our experience that as Uber and Lyft have been lobbying in 2017, Uber and Lyft had more lobbyists than Amazon, Microsoft, and Walmart combined. Something like 60% of the fare before Uber went public was paid through venture capital money. And so, so when we were fighting that fight against misclassification and really the gigification of labor and of work, a lot of unions really didn't want to see that we were on the front lines of an economic shift. Like you can say capitalism and capitalists have no moral code, right? Than what we have. But practically speaking, they're always steps ahead, and they do not hesitate to reinvent themselves. I remember when I was a kid and, Madonna was really famous, and all you ever heard about Madonna was like, oh, she's reinventing herself, And I never really understood that as a kid. I was like, well, her music sounds the same to me, and she looks the same. I was like, if you wear a different wig, is that reinventing? I didn't really get it. But, think about that. Like, when we think about pop culture, so much of it is like, as if like, that type of reinvention is like something positive. That's because capitalism does that on the drop of a dime. It is constantly reinventing itself, and we're going through a new phase of reinvention right now. We as a labor movement and as a broader working class movement, we have to find ways of changing the narrative so people understand that all of these issues, whether we're talking about tax breaks for the ultra-rich at the expense of Medicaid and Medicare, the privatization of Social Security, the stripping down of the National Labor Relations Board and the Department of Labor, and the gutting of federal workforce and civil servants who are majority people of color and women, or it's mass deportations. These are all the same attacks. They're fundamentally attacks on the working class, and they are fundamentally a test on the ability of the working class to see through them and to rise together through solidarity. And nobody is in the business day-to-day of solidarity like the labor union. Workers know you sometimes cannot survive, literally stay alive without each other. Poor people know that in their neighborhoods. Working class people know that. You take care of each other, and workers know it. Whether it's on the assembly line or you're driving on the Bruckner and you could have a flat tire, and no one's gonna stop for you unless it's another yellow cab or what we call a TC plate. It's a taxi and limousine commission plate. That same sense of solidarity that workers live off every single day to survive, we as a labor movement have to find ways of interjecting around these different issues, particularly around the issues of immigrant rights, whether it's turning out on the pickets, helping with defenses, or really continually saying immigrant rights are workers' rights. That Trump's immigration policy is a labor policy. It is an economic policy. It is not just the business, but it is the existential duty of the labor movement to be on the front lines of labor policies and economic policies. And just one very last point that I want to make. I think the other really important role that we have, particularly as left labor, you know, before the elections, you kept hearing people talk about Trump being a threat to democracy, democracy, democracy. And I think there was such a failure in that narrative because people we're so trained to think of democracy as who's going to be able to vote. It's really hard for a Democratic Party that's been the face of a genocide and has played so many games at the primary level, particularly since 2016, to now anoint themselves as the safe keepers of democracy. Okay, but beyond that hypocrisy, there's the other issue. Democracy isn't just about who is able to vote. Democracy is fundamentally about the equity in our economy. And we really fail to build a narrative around that, you know, and that oligarchy, you know, the extreme consolidation of wealth, you know, is an issue of democracy, not just because those who consolidated that wealth control the rules and law of the land and therefore the distribution of wealth, but they also control, through that they control people's everyday life. Who gets to put food on the table and how much food they get to put on the table? Those are issues of democracy, particularly under capitalism and in a time of unprecedented oligarchy. And I just don't think anybody else has the clarity, the consciousness, or the language to talk about these things besides left labor. And so I believe that is our role, and honest to God, that's why being in this room and seeing all of you, that's why I feel a sense of hope. Thank you.
And now we will hear from Dr. Patricia Martone.
Good evening, everyone. So, you know, how many people know that greater than 30% of the nurses and doctors in the United States are immigrants? How many of you know that about 40% of the home health aid workers are immigrants? If one person raised their hand, could you imagine if some of the policies that we continuously hear coming out continue to progress, where we will be as a society trying to provide health care to everyone that needs it? You know, the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy in 2022 said 96.7 billion. Do you know what that number is for? $96.7 billion were generated from undocumented tax contributors. So what does that say to us? Well, 60% of that goes to the feds, 40% in New York State, and it was about $3 billion for us here. But of the 60% that went to the Fed, 34% of that went to social insurance programs. Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment. Something that if you are an undocumented taxpayer, you don't even qualify to get. They contributed more to our economy than they can possibly ever cash in. And I'm gonna tell you, they have tax credit restrictions, are less likely to claim a refund, and let's use their tax preferred retirement and investment incomes. Why do I say this? Because in that year, they documented 11 million undocumented workers that paid taxes, but they were 3.4% of our population. Guess how many made up our workforce? And I'm not just saying healthcare, the American workforce, 5%. So what happens when we lock them out, drag their kids out of schools, go into hospitals, drag patients out of their beds, pull them out of clinics, not have our lawyers represent unrepresented minors or minors that are alone in this world. What are we doing to our society? I don't know about you, but I cannot sleep at night. I am a Haitian American, and I'm going to tell you, there is not one person, whether you're from Venezuela, whether you're from another country, that I don't know that's going through a lot of problems right now. Because the thought of them losing the people in their family, or friend, or neighbor, to what's going on, and not really taking into consideration the full picture of what it means to deport people without having a proper process is a problem. So I know a lot of people think, well, they're undocumented. How can it? No, they're somewhat documented. Let's be clear. Maybe all don't have documents at the same time, but by the time they get to a location, they are documented. They were given papers to work. And again, do you know if they remained in our system? If we were to document, and this is for 2022, if we had chosen in that year to document everyone that was in the country, you want to know how much more we would have generated for our economy? $40 billion. And I'm saying this because people love to say they take more than they give, and how wrong are they? And I'm sharing this as a frustrated healthcare worker, as someone who represents healthcare workers. I not only represent clinics, I represent pharmacies, I represent people that are in medical facilities adjacent. They do medical facility adjacent work. They do legal work around a lot of things that are going on in healthcare. None of them deserve to be unemployed, and none of them who are doing the work they're doing, getting paid what they're getting paid, by the way, need to continue doing that work if it's not for their hearts to begin with, knowing that this work must be done. So what they're getting paid for those fundings to be cut off is atrocious and unnecessary. So $11.99, we have 450,000 plus members. We're in 5 states and DC. And our strategies are, one, to prevent institutions from having the issues that they're having, with potentially having deportations right from under the patients from their beds, which is a horrible thought. You go to your doctor, you're being escorted out of the clinic in handcuffs, and they're not being gentle about it. 2, patient advocacy, because if we don't represent them, who will at this point? 3, we believe that our elected should stand up and do the right thing, not jeopardize the people of New York when this was supposed to be a safe haven city, jeopardize our family and friends for deals that they're cutting. We don't believe in that. And 4, we firmly believe that we are going to continue to educate our members and everyone around them to make sure that they know what their legal rights are to push back on ICE. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now be hearing from Brandon Montier.
All right, thanks to the Left Labor Project, and thank you to the panelists. I especially want to say that I'm honored to be on a panel with Bhairavi Desai, who's a hero of mine, someone that every time I get a phone call from her, I have to pinch myself and just be like, oh my God, that's Bhairavi calling me, that's crazy. So I just want to say thank you for her words and her leadership, especially now in these times. I myself am the son of formerly undocumented immigrants in this country. My family left Guatemala during the Civil War in the early 1980s. They were escaping war, they were escaping poverty, and a very tumultuous time in the history of my country, especially with a lot of support from the U.S. foreign policy establishment at the time, right, to destabilize the country in the effort to beat out communism and whatnot. So this is an incredibly personal topic for me. I'm also standing here not just because became a union member and an elected union leader, but I am here also in this position because of the labor movement itself. My family, my grandfather, when he came to the United States, he immediately started working in the packaging industry, and it was a union job. So he was one of the few, I think, Central American migrants at the time who found a union job, right? A job that was able to provide him a living wage, retirement security, a path to buying a home, which was unheard of in the 1990s for a lot of folks from Guatemala, and still today, right? Folks from Central America continue to be some of the most exploited, and abused workers in our city and in our country. So this is very much a story of the power of the labor movement, right? To transform lives, right? When you build a labor movement and a union movement, my dad's also a 32GPJ SEIU member. When you build a labor movement that welcomes in immigrants, right, and organizes, immigrant and U.S.-born worker together, that's the key to building power, right? And I think we can't forget that today. I'm going to latch on to something Bhairavi said, which was that this is a question of economic policy. And I think that's very important. We had a leadership meeting earlier this morning with the Region 9A UAW locals in New York City, in which we touched a lot about just what the future path is during the Trump administration, Trump 2.0. We've heard a lot of pundits, right, talk about the need for an economic populism, and that's definitely true, right? Economic populist ideas work, right? Working class centered ideas, right? More jobs, more opportunities, making life more bearable for working class people is a great way to get away from both neoliberalism and also the appeal of Trumpism, right? Especially as we've seen increasingly, including in our state, in our city, working class communities of any background have started voting more and more for the Republican Party, right? But I want to add an amendment to that, right? It's not just economic populism, right? It's economic populism rooted in working class struggle. Why struggle? Because struggle, in order to succeed, right, requires unity. And the only way to build unity is through solidarity, which inherently brings different kinds of workers together, right? That's the way you win a strike. That's the way you win a record contract. That's the way you win an organizing drive. That's the way you win transformative legislation. That's the only way, right? So to me, it's not just which politician is going to say the right things, right? Or which formerly neoliberal Democratic senator now has speaks a different tune, right? Because they realize where the country's going. It's also about the experience of collective struggle, right? That's what the key is, because it's through that struggle that different people come into contact, learn how to organize and build together, have conflict. That's key, right? Have conflict. And if there's an organization, right, like a union, right, supporting those workers to achieve their goal that allows democracy to flourish, that is the key to changing the dynamics in this country right now, right? And we don't have enough of that. How do I know that? Because union density right now is the lowest it's been in decades, right? So that's the key, right, for us, as organizers, right, is to take that, I think, these ideas into all the work we do, and for our unions to really, this is the time, right, to just throw down, to give the resources necessary to organize, to enter into, workplaces and spaces that we haven't been in before, to provide workers the resources and the tools to organize themselves to win, right? There's no workplace in this country you're going to enter in which you don't really have a very diverse workforce, right? Immigrant, non-immigrant, Black, white, Latino, Asian, that inherently have to work together. Therefore, they're exploited together, right? That's the key to winning. And for us at the UAW, right, whether it's been the stand-up strike of 2023 against the big three automakers, or winning for the first time at Volkswagen, right, the first transnational plant in the South. It's been the same keys, right? These are, it's a multiracial, workforce that's headed towards the same goal, right? So again, from the collective bargaining and the strike context to politics, I think that's key. Because we know that the decimation of the working class in America, whether it's been through the loss of good-paying manufacturing jobs, or the rise of opioids and the drug crisis that so many communities are facing, through the rise of mass incarceration as a supposed solution to all these things, all of these things has facilitated the scapegoating of immigrants, right? And I think that, to me, to get back to what Bhairavi said, is the key, right? To frame immigration, illegal immigration, etc., as issues of class politics and as issues that are an obstacle, right, to building that solidarity that we need. And I think if we're rooted in that, we have a plan, right, and a vision to organize around this, I think we're going to be able to finally provide an alternative to Trumpism and to the neoliberal democratic establishment. Thank you, everyone.
We will now be hearing from Ligia Guallpa.
All right, so great to follow up with great speakers. So, anyways, yeah. So for those that may not know me, my name is Ligia Guallpa. A little bit about me: I'm actually immigrant myself as well. That migrated with my parents, and I just want to share a little bit of. I think it is important to recognize that the entire nation has been built out of immigrants, right? So the immigrant story, I think it's a collective story. We all share that story because whether it was the one that just arrived recently, whether it was the one who arrived decades before, I think we're all following, and our parents and our generations have been following the same dream, which is that American dream, right? Which is and I think we tend to forget that. That story has been about opportunities, about prosperity, about the ability for our kids and generations to come to have the ability to have the freedom, the opportunities to live with dignity. And I want to reflect that because that's our collective story. And I think we're living a critical moment where we want this government to divide us, right? To see that we're different, that we don't share that collective story. That
Actually,
we don't.
Guallpa, you use the immigrant. Hey, you use the immigrant. You're a lobbyist. She's a lobbyist, brother.
Sorry, you don't care.
You don't care. You don't care. She's a lobbyist. You don't care. She's a lobbyist.
This is another time. Sit down. Sit down right
She
now.
doesn't pick up the phone.
Sit down right now. Sit down right now. Sit down right now.
And that's coming from a Trump supporter, by the way. Who has wear his Trump hat, has show up to immigrant
Sit down right
rallies.
now.
Who's the host? You're the host. You're the host. You're the host.
Sit down right now.
We're the host.
Sit down right now.
I'm asking you who's the host. I'll talk to the host. Let me talk to the host. She's a lobbyist. You know she is.
Can we take this outside?
He's a pain. We want to talk to him.
Yeah.
Disruptive. Get out. We're trying to have a
I'm
conversation.
asking you who's the host.
We are.
You're the host. You're the host.
We are the host. All the hosts stand up. Hosts stand up. All the hosts stand up. All the hosts stand up. Good God, yes.
All right, thank you.
This is somebody that both Ligia and I know because comes out of an organization that is paid by Uber to undermine the work that we do in our industry. But the sister is so kick-ass that she has taken on all those detractors, how many of them, right? Because it's an entire company union that's funded by Uber to attack our work. So, but you know what? They only attack you when you're effective, so.
There you go.
And I'm just gonna reflect because I think what just happened right now, I think we're seeing probably in our neighborhoods, right? And that's the reality, and I think we need to reflect. It is very sad and very unfortunate that our communities are divided. And are divided because we're living in a moment where we have a government that has failed us in every part of our hearts and in our communities. And we have a democratic government who has failed our communities, who has used our communities, and who has really pretty much sold our neighborhoods. We're living in a moment where we have corporations who are pretty much in power, right? And we have, in New York, I think it's a perfect example where we have a city government and a mayor that has pretty much sold the entire city to developers, right? Which is true. We have a governor who's pretty much not willing to act and protect and do her job, which was elected. And that has played a critical role on making sure that our communities continues to distrust not only our democratic government, but I think the organizing process that really needs to take place in our community. And this is why you see not only Raul, but you, and this is something I see in my neighborhood too, where we're having meetings where we're not divided. I think about where we see our hearts and where we see our hopes be. I think what we're divided as about what issues we want this country to be heard. And I see that as an opportunity to organize, as an opportunity to talk, as an opportunity to have hard conversations that often we're not willing to have or our communities are not willing to listen to. And I think this is a moment where we need to start thinking about how we creatively start having those conversations in our communities. And it's hard, and I think we need to start at home. And we need to start thinking not also ourselves as workers, but also as consumers. And I was gonna start the conversation with a quote, and I think this is also reflective of the power that we can have in this critical moment. And this actually goes through one of my heroes that I get my organizing inspiration from, which is Cesar Chavez. Out of when he started organizing, he said, "Who gets the risk? The risks are given to consumers, the unsuspected consumers and the poor working force. And who gets the benefits? The benefits only are for corporations and for the money makers." And that's the reality. We are consumers. Without our consumer power, there is no real corporations. And today was a conversation about economics. And in economics is integrated about not just workers' justice, right? But it's about consumer justice. It's about, somebody was saying it here, is about healthcare justice. So we need to start thinking about how we incorporate our collective movements and our collective fights to make sure how we can make strategic changes. And the reason I share that is because I organize particularly delivery workers, right? And we happen to be representing a workforce, 65,000 app delivery workers who came out of the shadows actually during 2020, during the critical time, during a chaotic time, which was actually COVID-19. And that workforce grew significantly during 2020 was because there was a huge need to provide a service to consumers, which happens to be you. During a critical time, many of us were told by government not to leave, and many of us were afraid to leave, including myself, because it was really unsure what was going on out there. And during that time, there was a critical need to move and transport medicine, food, and other services. And corporations actually saw that opportunity to make profit. And they did. They saw the opportunity to use their online platforms, which was actually something that Bhairavi was mentioning before, something that wasn't really emerging. And somebody will talk about it actually for decades, but nobody pay attention to it. Just as Bhairavi was talking about robots, right? Like, that's crazy that an AG could be transporting people, without actually a human thing. Well, actually, corporations saw the future, and they realized that was the future of a new gig economy that was an online platform economy. And the right time came, and they did take advantage of mostly immigrant workers, because it was about 80 or 90% of the people who were transporting your food, your medicine, it happened to be app delivery workers who were denied, who were stripped away of basic protections as workers, and were turned into actually gig workers. And as Bhairavi said, which are completely denied of basic labor protections. And during that time, what that meant was that workers were not entitled to a minimum wage. We're not entitled to healthcare. We're not entitled to the basic need, the basic protections that we take for granted these days. And workers have started organizing and challenging the power of big app delivery companies during a time that they didn't saw was coming. And workers actually started organizing, not, and I think it is important to understand that, not because they were, they saw a critical time and it was a strategic. It was out of necessity. It was out of crisis. It was out of desperation that they thought that it was either I try to survive or die, because it was about dying at that moment, that they thought that it was about organizing, that organizing was the ultimate thing to survival. And they did that. And they did it because they needed to survive. They needed to leave. And we took, as organizers, we took that opportunity to say, let's bring people together to win what was at that moment so critical, but also let's build a movement that can last long and bring changes for the entire industry. And the reason I'm sharing that story is because that's exactly the moment we're living now. It is a moment of crisis. It is a moment of fear. And our communities are living on fear. And I think this is the critical moment where we all need to have those critical and hard conversations and use every fight that we're having, because we're all getting attacked, right? Whether you're a worker, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a renter, whether you even healthcare workers, we're all getting attacked. But this is a critical moment where we need to start responding. But organizing is the only response that we have and the ultimate solution to bring our communities. And I think this is a time where we need to start having hard conversations about where we want to have those conversations. And those conversations need to start in our communities, in our neighborhoods. And I'm super excited because this is a moment where Bhairavi was saying, like, we can build solidarity. Solidarity is the key to really confronting corporations and even corrupt, legislators who are in power, and we have the power to put them out of office. But in order to put them out of the office and bring people that really are going to represent us, we need to start educating our workers, our consumers, our community members about that, not only voting, but organizing, and democracy, it starts in our kitchen tables.
Give a hand for all the panelists, and thank you for the security.
Wow. Thank you for that absolutely inspiring and thought-provoking presentation. So we're going to open this up to question and answer, but we're going to kick it off first with a few just prepared questions to start the conversation from our organizing collective. So whoever wants to start off to answer this question, go for it. So what are some notable examples of campaigns that your unions or labor in general have taken up on behalf of immigrant workers, and what lessons on organization can we draw from them? So it's a two-part question.
And you don't have to go up to the lectern.
Yes, you don't have to go up to the mic, we'll just,
Yeah.
But so what are some notable examples of campaigns that your unions or that labor in general, your organizations, have taken up on behalf of immigrant workers? So we'd love to hear from y'all about that.
So why don't I
Yeah,
take
go
this?
for it, go for it.
Sure. So 1199, we at one point were very strong on making sure that TPS was extended for many countries, and we would, during this campaign, we brought people to Washington, D.C. to go testify. We involved our Congress members. We tried to make sure that our members knew and understood what was at risk when it came to healthcare and other issues, so that they could support these individuals. So there were busloads that were going to have these conversations over TPS. So that's what we did.
Great.
So over 92% of drivers are immigrants, and we have one of the largest Muslim workforces in the city. And I think particularly for us over like the last 20 plus years, attacks on immigrants and Islamophobia have always kind of gone hand in hand. And so we've had a number of things, but I guess really what I would reflect on is in 2017, we did a spontaneous strike at JFK Airport against the Muslim ban. We shut down, we helped to shut down Kennedy Airport as immigrant rights activists had really taken it over. And the reason we decided to strike is because a few days earlier, we had a different spontaneous strike where we shut down the airport because one of our members, a day before a rally against Cuomo, was assaulted by an airport dispatcher. And so out of solidarity, our members shut down the lot. So this is a massive lot. It holds up to about 700 yellow cabs at a time. And so nobody would move. And they brought out dogs and tow trucks, or cops everywhere. And our members sat down and they said, we're not moving till the union says we can move. Because they arrested our member after he was assaulted. So anyway, we had done this spontaneous strike, and so when we saw the immigrant rights activists going on to the airport, the Terminal 4, we said, you know what? If we strike at the lot, they're gonna divert the police force, and we know it's like a pretty tiny police force at the airport. And so we ended up doing a spontaneous strike. And it did work. They did divert the force, and we had no idea people were even paying attention. We got home and saw delete Uber was trending, because while our yellow cab members went out on strike, Uber started to use surge pricing to incentivize people to take their service and all. But that strike was also the culmination of just a lot of different campaigns that we have done through the years. I don't have an answer for this, but I'll share the question that we have ourselves, which is, I think, really trying to understand why is there not that type of a similar militant response to this episode of Trump? And that really, it's not an answer, but I'll just share with you, that's actually the question that we've been grappling with. Yeah.
I'll also just add that we represent DPW around 3,000 public defenders and legal services workers, and during Trump 1.0, as ICE appeared in immigration court, the folks who represented undocumented immigrants in court started coordinating walkouts in 2015 in response to ICE's presence in the court, with a clear demand that ICE should not be in court. Undocumented immigrants have due process rights, and they should not be threatened or taken in those settings. So that's a long-term fight. It's a fight that I'm also curious as to how that kind of gets sparked up again today, but yeah, there's definitely concrete examples of direct action.
Well, I'll share, I think, the most recent one, which is yesterday we delivery workers just won a big settlement, because it's $16.75 million that will go into the pockets of delivery workers, mostly immigrant workers. So that's huge. And it's only for 3 years, which is from 17 to 19. And we're looking to, actually, it was funny because yesterday, one of our member leaders, his name is Selu, he was talking to the AG. He's like, AG, it's just DoorDash. Now we need to go after Uber. And then he was showing his screen. He's like, look, AG, I'm sure there's 100 millions now from Uber. So that was exciting. But I want to say, a lot of workers came forward, and we also have another investigation with the city. But by the way, the reason of the settlement was because it was we were able to prove what delivery workers have been saying for a long time, which was Uber was stealing your tips, consumers' tips. What they were doing, Uber, during that time period is that they were promising delivery workers $10 per hour, or $10 per trip or per hour. What they did is that they were taking your tip to subsidize that $10 that they were promising as a base pay. And they told consumers that they were going to use your tip, that it was going to directly go to the worker. And they were misleading to the workers, saying like, oh, we're going to give you $10 if you complete X number of deliveries. And they finally admit that they were doing that. But actually, wage theft was more aggressive during 2020. But the reason I'm sharing this story is because, and it's connected to immigrants, is because we were able to spark investigations, city investigations, a lot, especially last year. More workers started coming forward. It was a lot because of the deferred action protection. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar, but Biden did he did some things good. One of them was that there was a discretion that would allow immigrant workers that come forward with labor violations to seek some sort of immigration protections, right? Like protection from deportation, and gives you 4 years of work authorization so you can continue with the investigation. So a lot of workers saw this as an opportunity to come without fear, saying like, great, I'm gonna be protected, because there was a huge fear about that. So we were able to bring some immigrant workers to come forward, especially against these multi-billion-dollar corporations. And that was so important for many of the workers, but now that kind of is dead right now. But I think the reason I'm mentioning this is because, there is a greatest fear of most immigrant workers coming forward, right? So I think what we're going to see this next 2-4 years is many workers, being afraid of coming forward against their employer, right? And we're also thinking that, what we're going, and we started seeing this already, which is employers directly reporting their workers to ICE to create fear. And today we actually saw a letter of employer who actually sent an email to ICE with the address, with the picture, and everything of the worker. So just going back to what Bhairavi was saying is like, we need to be strategic, and I think there needs to be how we build emergency responses, not only in community level, but also in workplace, because we will potentially see workplace rates and targeted workplace rates across the country, including in New York City, which hasn't happened in a really long time.
Thank you for those answers. Yes. We definitely want to open it up to the floor. We have a few more prepared. How many, if we were to say who wants to ask a question, let's see a show of hands. Okay. We'll do two more. Yeah, one more. Okay, we'll do one more. Okay, great. We'll do one more question. And then we'll open it up. So what can organizations? So I think what's so inspiring here is we hear how all these sort of from the grassroots organizing in new sectors are developing and winning enormous gains. What can organizations like the AFL-CIO and our central labor councils do in this moment to fight back against the Trump onslaught on immigrant communities and protect immigrant working families?
I'll start. Well, first of all, I think Los Liberalistas was an incredible testament of union solidarity. I would say it was the first time that I saw, including giving a shout out to New York City and Central Labor Council, who was a big and continues to be a big supporter, 32BJ, as well, who actually, it was the first time that I think I saw unions having really clear understanding how important was the fight of extending more protections, or at least some protections for delivery workers. And I think more of that needs to happen. I think there's some unions, and I think majority of unions are moving. There's some that are not understanding that immigrant rights are actually workers' rights, right? And I think this is the perfect opportunity to start engaging more of what that conversation is. There's different fights that are happening to protect immigrants, and I think the biggest fear right now in New York City, I can only speak for delivery workers, is the increasing interaction of NYPD with delivery workers that are happening this time. because Mayor Adams has deployed number of cops to the streets, to our neighborhoods, what we're seeing right now is many of these cops mostly targeting delivery workers because it's an easy target. They're always on the road. They happen to be in a corner. They happen to be easy targets. Right now, there's two proposed rules or legislative proposals that are included in Governor Hochul's budget, which is one is reducing the speed limit, right, of e-bikes, and the other one is reclassification of Class 3 e-bikes. Those three, the way it's being sold right now in your neighborhood is the fact that this is about street safety. This is not about street safety. This is about increasing policing and criminalization of actually e-bike riders, because you have consumers who want the leisure of getting their food, but they don't want their delivery driver on their roads, right? So they're creating pressure in their communities to hold their legislator accountable to addressing the street safety issue by removing e-bike riders from your roads and the chaos that the apps have created. And here we have a governor and some legislators who are saying like, great, let's regulate by actually penalizing workers. And the best way to do it is by increasing more policing on delivery workers. And that's a great example of like, you know, understanding how street safety, many of the issues that are happening is so interconnected with immigrant rights issues.
Any other thoughts on that? So
Maybe,
open it up to the
we'll
floor.
open it up.
Yeah.
I'll try and take stack if folks, feel free to raise your
Raise your
hand,
hands
and
and then
we'll try
Right.
this out. Okay, great,
Oh, we have one.
go for it.
So in the front with the right.
Oh, me. Okay, good. Okay. Oh, sorry, revealed for a couple minutes. Well, I'm so excited. I do not know a single person in this room with the exception of my comrade right here next to me. And that is so exciting to me because now is the time, right, to build genuine relationships person to person, organization to organization. So when we take action, it does something. It means something, and it's rooted in our political unities as people who are champions of the working class and immigrant rights. My name's Jo, and I am here in support of the Defense Migrants Campaign. This is a national campaign recently launched that's being waged by Migrante USA, which is an organization of overseas Filipinos that is fighting for the rights of migrants here and for the national liberation of the Philippines. And I so appreciate, thank you so much, yes! And I so appreciate that it's being put at the very front that anti-immigration policies are economic policies, because the labor export policy that was enacted under the Marcos dictatorship in the 70s has for decades been packaging Filipinos for migration predominantly to the US through institutions in education, through underdevelopment of the country, and by straight up trafficking, straight up deceiving Filipino workers who are just trying to make a living wage into coming to this country. And then as soon as someone like Trump is elected, as soon as it's time to reform the economy in whatever shape, it's, you gotta go. You gotta go. Oh, sorry. So yes, thank you for putting that at the front. I'm also here in support of a local campaign that's being waged by Migrante New Jersey and New York, Justice for Denmark and Jovi. Thank you. Denmark and Jovi are two Filipino migrants who have been living in the US for years. They're two caregivers who, at their home care agency last fall, were assaulted by a patient and unjustly detained by ICE on trumped-up charges. Jovi, facing very few options, chose to voluntarily leave the country, but Denmark remains in the custody of ICE. And this week, we are mobilizing our Filipino organizations and allies for a week of action to campaign for Denmark's release and to demand the Philippine consulate, which is supposed which is supposed to give funds to overseas migrants who are in distress to give Denmark the funds he needs since he is out of a job, facing very harsh conditions in this ICE facility, and his family needs to eat.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Wait, can I ask a question? Sorry. Yes. Sorry, I've never done this before, so I'm like, energy coursing through my veins. So the question I want to ask, is how is organized labor advocating for the rights of undocumented workers in the workplace, particularly workplaces that are predominantly undocumented workers, or temporary, often trafficked workers under J-1 visa programs where unions are present? Thank you.
Well, that's a tough one because I think there is a real issue in certain industries, and I think depends on certain industries particularly, because I think the biggest challenge, at least that we have seen with immigrant workers, has been that there have been entering more in the gig economy where there is few protections. So very often unionizing is not a right any protection. I'm speaking specifically for domestic workers who we organize as well. Also gig workers in the app delivery work. Actually, legally, delivery workers are not entitled to unionization. That doesn't mean that workers cannot form their own type of union in their workplaces. And I think what we have been strategically thinking is how we still, despite the legality of it, how we continue to build some sort of union organization or some sort of collective power to force employers to agree to basic labor protections or set up some basic labor standards in their industries or in their workplaces. But it all depends, I think, industry by industry, because the healthcare industry is very different, who have actually more protections, and I think a lot of the work is kind of shifting around and turning into more gig, which I think it's what I think this administration is going to continue to fight, which is making misclassification easier for corporations and employers.
Anyone else on the question of organizing the undocumented? Challenge.
And then we'll go.
Thank you for recognizing me. I'm Derek Boyd, one of the political directors here at 1199. First, I want to apologize about that earlier disruption. We don't have to all share the same opinion, but in the halls of our establishment, our disagreements have to be expressed in a non-threatening and a non-disagreeable way. So we apologize for that and hope that you're okay. Secondly, just to add to what Pat talked about earlier, at 1199, we take immigrant rights and advocacy very seriously. We have an organization upwards of 80% of women. We have a home care division that's probably 90%, over 70,000 workers who are all women, and most of the immigrants. So in the past, Pat talked about the work we've done on TPS. We've also done work on DACA, which is Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, where we worked with legislators to try to draft legislation to extend the rights for those young adults who are undocumented to be able to have temporary protective status and be able to work here in the country. It seems like every time we get in a red zone, the goalpost keeps moving for immigrant rights, which is the reality right now under 47. One of the things that we're doing currently is partnering with the city and other progressive organizations like the Central Labor Council, where we are providing know your rights trainings for immigrant workers so that they understand when they're faced with some of these situations, how to actually advocate for themselves. What are the resources? Who do they call? Where do they go when something is happening that makes them or their family feel threatened? So those are trainings and dialogues that we're opening up to our members and partnering with other progressive organizations as well as labor to make sure that people know that they don't stand alone in this issue.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Irina, I'm a social worker, I'm a healthcare worker. I work at Jacobian North Central Hospital in the Bronx. And I want to say something, well, thank you for organizing it, and I appreciate a lot of people said about labor needs to organize to defend immigrants. We do need to organize, but we also have to do something practical in order to protect immigrants, to protect undocumented workers, because these are our brothers and sisters. And in New York City, 45% of working class people were born elsewhere, not in this country. 45% of our brothers and sisters in New York City are immigrants. Okay, so what do we do? Because a lot of people have questions. What do we do? How do we do it? How do we protect immigrant communities? How do we protect kids in the schools? How do we protect our patients in the hospitals? How we protect immigrant workers who work with us every day side by side? And I know nurses, you know, who were questioned by ICE because they have H-1 visa, okay? So, on January 9 of this year, Labor Committee to Defend Immigrants was established at the conference, and we now had 3 conferences and established Labor Committee to Defend Immigrants. This committee has representatives of many unions and many labor organizations, and I see some faces here who've been to our conferences. We had Teamsters. We had Asks Me DC 37, I'm one of them, I'm a steward at Local 768. We had CWA, Laundry Workers Center. We had 32BJ, we had 1199, we did have Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, TWU, UAW, UFT, teachers. Okay, thank you very much. You kind of snuck up on me. And all these people, all the labor that came to organize. We have practical work groups, Know Your Rights. We have groups to train people for rapid response, to outreach. We have people who train ourselves and train others. And we would like people in this room, if they would like to join us, to come to me. And I have sign-up sheets, and everybody would be welcome to join us.
Thank you.
I also have a packet of very good information for everyone.
Thank you.
Who is interested.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to go to this side of the room?
Yeah.
We're going to keep folks to 2 minutes just as a...
Yeah, sorry, right, 2 minutes, just to reiterate. Okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Colleen Donovan. I'm a Teamster in Local 804. I wanted to engage a bit because you were asking, like, how come workers, why aren't we striking like we were at around when you highlighted the JFK strike? And I think, like, the sister at the end, you were breaking down, like, every single lie that is put in front of us of, like, what is our relation to immigrants and how it's not the fact that they're leeches. And at least, like, I see it as 2 things that we can do. At least within the Teamsters, I'm sure people, especially my brothers and sisters in 804, I've already given agitational speeches at our local meeting recently, but I mean, our president is basically saying that all immigrants are illegal aliens, they're criminals, they're crooks, they're like coming to steal our jobs. So it also falls on, like, what is our leadership of our unions, what type of political education are we getting? So at least, you know, you also touched upon how workers innately can recognize that we're actually we have a lot more in common. We do need to learn our cultural differences and our racial differences and what separates us, because we can't have narrow outlooks, but all of that falls secondary to, like, our class position and the fact that we're exploited. So in Teamster Mobilize, I'm on the steering committee. It's a group of a bunch of rank and file Teamsters. We're not going to wait and sit around for a president to continue to put forward all this racist rhetoric, because these words do matter. They do infect the way we relate to our brothers and sisters. So we are having a meeting on March 5th. We made a statement calling out Trump. rights. You're right. Like, what are workers going to do when deportations are going to happen at the workplace? And guess what? All of our brothers and sisters and our coworkers want to do something about it. Like, we will be ready and willing to organize. When I went to 804 and I spoke, and also I just moved here from Oakland. But I've been like working class my whole life, and it just goes to show that like if you're in struggle with somebody, like they're like, come on in. You know, like everybody was like, hell yeah. Like I got hooting and hollering and warmly received. So I think we have to be bold to call out all the lies that we see, all the racist rhetoric, and really inspire ourselves that we're not just linked together because we're exploited, we're linked together because we can also like overthrow this whole friggin' system. And you're talking about capitalism is dead end, that we do need conflict, and that's true. So we have to like, yeah, work on some day-to-day stuff, call out the bullshit, and keep remembering that larger goal.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. We should probably take like 2 more, well, it's however long you all want to stay here, but let's have 2 more questions from the audience, and then we have 1 more question for our panelists. And again, we appreciate all the energy. Also, questions are good. Okay. The man in the back.
Yep.
No, that's you.
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Larry. I'm with the National Writers Union. Mauricio is also with the National Writers Union, the head of our sindicato. We were very active during Trump 1, where the crisis was a lot at the border, and we sent members to the border. And at that time, we were part of the UAW, which actually sent subsidized members to go to the border to be part of the campaign there. And you may remember that journalists who covered the crisis from Mexico, before they could come back into the country, their phones and devices were seized and copied by at the border. Anyway, we set up a committee in New York and Tucson, Southern California, and I think for us, the big question is a rapid response. What do you do when there's a big raid, which is coming? And so, how do we get hundreds of members to a detention center in southern Manhattan or in Brooklyn? So block bans should go to the airport, and I think that's something we should concentrate on.
Let's have maybe 1 more from the floor. All right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Lobbying for the person in white. Yes. Go for it.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
You briefly spoke about immigrants and people who are undocumented being worried about coming forward about having their wages stolen. Right now, what would your advice be to people who have had their wages stolen, who are undocumented, who are worried that if I go to city government, if I go to the state government, the national government is then going to ask those more local officials to then give my information over? What do you think is the current risk of that? And you might not be able to answer this question also.
Maybe someone repeat the question also.
Yeah. Do we want to take more questions, or?
Oh yeah,
should I
maybe we'll take a.
Okay, then we can answer.
Yeah. Okay, so there was the person in the front and the person with the whitish gray hair in the back. Okay. Yeah, let's have those 2 folks as well. Then let's cap it. Yeah. So.
Hi, I'm here from Atlanta, and you all know that the struggle to stop cop cities has spread all around the country and is particularly urgent here in New York. So I'm just wondering how you all see your work organizing documented and undocumented labor intersecting with the struggles against Cop Nation, but also with the larger international struggle alongside Palestinian workers.
Okay, and then let's take the one back there.
Hi, my name's Ligia. I'm a member of 1199, and I work in one of the criminal defense offices that Frank was talking about. And during Trump 1.0, we mobilized, walked out when the ICE came to the courts. There was also a whole big, both political and legal movement to keep ICE out of Rikers. Like all of that, they're fucking everywhere. Like they're in Rikers. Right, DOC is now putting people's immigration issues on their website. Like it's just like it is flood the zone, right? And I think Bhairavi asked the question of like, why don't we have the same reaction? this is not the way things are supposed to be. This is some weird, crazy thing that happened, and we're just gonna fight it until it stops. And we did that, and now he's back, and he's stronger. And the movement that supports him is stronger. And the politics that support him is stronger. And to be honest, I very much blame the Democratic Party for all of this.
Wake it up, block it.
And I feel like, and I think our labor movement has been very tied to the Democratic Party. And so I have a question, is what, you know, I wish this was 20 years ago when we were talking about this, but like, and we were talking about this 20 years ago, can we build a labor party? Can we build some sort of left bloc? And obviously that's not gonna happen overnight, but can we build some sort of left coalition that could be the basis for a real break from, because I think we have a complete crisis of the political system in this country.
Great, thank you.
So I think we got the questions there, and do any of the panelists want to respond? And then we have a question of our own to wrap it up. So, then the two questions. Anyone want to take that?
Maybe I can respond to the wage stuff, and then others. You know, I think I just want to say that I think we're struggling with that too right now. Just being honest and transparent, because it is a scary moment where we have had workers that have actually told us like and they have actually come where we are encouraging to file a complaint, and they have said no. And one of the things that we started thinking about how we do things differently. We started thinking about how we do things differently, and you know, there's something more powerful than collective action. So I think that's where you know, we're thinking about where as a strongest strategy to start making sure people can come forward safely, which is about how we can build collective action, which is like easy things like, you know, dropping off a demand letter with not just, they're not going there alone, but they're going with other community members. And that, I think that's linked to this emergency response. And I would love to see like how we can do small like collective actions, not only with workers, but also with community members, because I think that's a way we can start sparking solidarity and other conversations as well about what's happening in different neighborhoods and in different workplaces and industries.
You know, I just want to address one thing that Lucy brought up. You know, people are in shock, but I don't know how they could possibly be shocked that Project 2025 was a real agenda of Donald Trump. So I think that's part of the problem. They need to get beyond the fact that they actually voted for someone who was going to do all those things, right? And then have to deal with their neighbors and look them in the face and say, okay, I messed up. Now what do I do? I think we got to take them on a journey to get them to the point where they understand, okay, I made a mistake, nobody's blaming you for it, but now we need your bodies in the street with us. We need you to come out and support us to protest everything he's doing. I think that's one thing that's going to really move them and change their behavior, and have them recognize that, okay, we know you might not always be happy with someone you vote for, but this is the time we need your voice. We've done it before. We voted for politicians that didn't carry out what they were supposed to do. And what did we do? We went and protested them. We protested them. Just in this case, you might not want to bring your undocumented with you. So that's, you know, we're just gonna have to do it. We're gonna have to fight him at every single opportunity we have. We cannot lie down and not respond to him.
I just wanted to say something really very like practical for us in New York City. I mean, we have a mayor that's allowed for the complete destruction of Sanctuary City, and you know, this is a real crisis in this political moment. I think what's going to happen in the next couple of months with the election is incredibly relevant to everything that we're talking about. You know, I mean, there's a way in which, right, ICE has had more access and more presence throughout, you know, our neighborhoods to Rikers, and it's unbelievable. And I do think part of like for us in New York City, you know, see, I think the shock is very real for most, you know, for people across the country. But then in New York City, there's the double shock of what's happening locally, I think, for us. And it is something that we're gonna need to really practically respond to. But the other thing I wanted to say is it's really important that that we change some of the narrative or some of the ways that we talk about this notion of immigrant rights. Like, immigrant workers' rights isn't just about immigration programs. It's also, like, if there were no deportations happening, if there was amnesty overnight, workers who are immigrants would still need to fight for rights. You know, and like part of what's happened, I think, in the labor movement is you kind of like, you know, I think actually immigrants end up being marginalized when we don't recognize that, you know, and so for example, you know, you might have, you know, I know that there are unions, I won't name them, there are unions right now, you know, we're talking about, you know your rights trainings, and we'll probably even talk about rapid response, Ligia and I know. But you know what? A lot of them are the same unions. Well, for example, we'll make deals we'll be willing to make a deal with Uber behind our backs, behind the backs of organizations that were built predominantly by immigrant workers, right? Or you know, where the labor movement has for the past several decades not really understood the role of organizations that we call worker centers. So organizations of workers fighting for themselves, building a union, but have been cut out of the National Labor Relations Act because either they've been misclassified or the structure of their work is different, and in those industries the workers are predominantly immigrants, and so most of these organizations end up being seen as immigrant worker organizations. And the truth is, most unions, organized labor, has been very hostile to organizations like ours, you know, and so we have to, there has to be a real, much more deeper change, and we have to really take on deeper issues of racism and classism and xenophobia within the labor movement that go beyond a moment of crisis like this.
Yeah, I'll just say, there's many reasons why the Democratic Party lost in this past election, but I think even if, let's say, like the concrete reason in a poll people give for why they voted for Trump or didn't vote at all isn't Palestine, I think Palestine was very much a death sentence for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's campaign. And I'll say that precisely because of, I know organizing-wise in 2020 to get Donald Trump out of office, it took a major push, right, from folks on the ground, a lot of young folks, folks with a broader social consciousness than just voting for Democrats, right? And that's precisely who was lost, right, during this election cycle. So I don't think the Democratic Party is going to contend with that question, right? So I think just like they're not contending with the fact that they lost working class voters, right, in many ways. And I think that's a real key political question for all of us, I think, involved in thinking through left labor, politics. And so I think for us, I think we should be confident that the two things are true, right? Working class people want justice, and working class people do not support war, right? They don't. And so, whether or not, working class people understand the dynamics of Middle Eastern politics or understand all the, the history of Israel and Palestine, I think they can pretty easily get behind a policy of no more support for genocide and no more support for foreign wars, right? That also take away from our ability to support, our working people in the United States. I think that's the key, and I think we can build something for sure.
Thank you. The committee has one more question, for everybody here, but also we'll address it to Brandon. We hear your international president has called for general strike.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know. Do y'all know that? So May 1st, 2028. And But we got a May Day coming up real soon, May Day 2025. So I guess for everybody here, we're wondering, both in the short term and the long term, what do we do for May Day 2025, and how does that relate to May Day 2028?
Yeah, so I think they should be dress rehearsals for May Day 2028.
Okay.
So yeah, get together with your unions, you know, whatever movement organizations you're a part of, and get out to the street. I think there's a lot of coordinating going on about what to do on May Day 2025. There was a great May Day demonstration last year in the city. And yeah, if you're part of a union, or you haven't, you know, you're thinking of organizing for the first time, right? Organizing your workplace. You know, when you get to that bargaining period, think of May Day 2028, or technically April 30th, 2028, as the expiration date. That's going to be, you won't want to miss it.
All right. Well, thank you very much to the panelists for participating, and thank you to the audience for coming. We hope that one of the things that comes out of this meeting will be that all of us can work together within our respective unions and immigrant rights groups and community organizations, and to work with us, the Left Labor Project, to help build May Day 2025. We see this as central to our work to help build with you all towards May Day 2025, May Day 2028, and beyond.
Yeah, and we hope to see you all at our next organizing meeting, which is here on March 10th, and at our happy hour on March 21st, which is always a lot of fun. So if you have not signed up in the sign-in sheets, please do so. Solidarity forever, and have a great